Good morning and welcome to Q A, the home of Sunday morning politics. I'm Corin Dann. Great to have you along and being part of the political conversation. Well, Labor spent 9 years criticising National for its lack of action on housing affordability. Can they now deliver? And when will the building begin? And we'll have analysis from our panel, Dr. Grant Duncan, Jordan King, Marama Fox and Ashley Church. We are talking housing. Let's bring in our panel, Dr. Grant Duncan, Massey University political scientist, Jordan King, spokesperson for Renters United, Marama Fox, former Māori Party leader and co-leader, and Ashley Church, CEO of the Property Institute. Good morning to you all. We've got quite a lot to cover there. I want to start with you, Jordan, from the Renters. I guess, do you think your generation, the renters out there will feel encouraged by what they heard today? I think
the philosophy of the Minister is encouraging. There has been a market failure. You know, we can't keep going on like the way we've been doing. But there are some concerns here, particularly that question of affordability. So a $600,000 house in Auckland for first home buyers, that's a significant sum of money. So it was good to hear the Minister talk about things like shared equity, but we're going to need to see that policy detail fleshed out, and that's going to have to be quite central if we're actually going to get first home buyers moving into this new stock. So, you know, the broad question of affordability is still there for many people. So that hasn't changed. Also, it was encouraging to hear the Minister talk about, you know, the broader reforms to residential tenancies and stuff like that. That's extremely important for us as well. So I'm pleased that he's thinking about it as a broader package.
Ashley Church, from the property perspective, a few moving parts there, like 5-year limits. It sounds like he's being flexible. He's not going to be beholden perhaps to some of the things he thought. He's gone in there and had a look. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think it would be easy to start to dissect some of the detail, both previous detail and the detail that Phil talked about today. But the bigger picture, I'm actually heartened when I listen to him, because the bigger picture, and which is about building more houses as quickly as possible in order to bring prices down, and that's got to be the major focus. That still appears to be the focus. There are some aspects of this that we may not necessarily agree with. There are aspects of it that may be inequitable, but I would, my preference is to look at the bigger scope, the framework overall, and in 10 years the hope is we'll have 100,000 additional homes, and that will have the impact of bringing house prices down, because and Christchurch is an example of that. That's what happens when you...
Marama Fox, do you feel, we're talking of equitable, do you think that Māori are going to get, you know, are they going to be looked after in this Kiwi Build scheme?
Oh, well, first let me say that I congratulate the Minister, because he's talking the right type of talk, and that is encouraging. But I already know that if you're going to build 1,000-ish houses in Mount Albert, they're going to be 2-bedroom houses, and Māori and Pacifica whānau who live in South Auckland and looking to try and get into the property market.
Well, iwi's working with them though, isn't he?
Iwi are working with them, but we're going to have to do more around iwi land and Papakainga land, because right now you can't even get a mortgage on Māori-owned land or communally-owned Māori land unless we change the regulations in the market, or unless the government back those mortgages, because where else are you going to get them from? I think that at the moment we can build as many houses as we like, but if they're not in the realistic affordable range with enough bedrooms for Māori and Pacifica families, there will be an inequitable issue here.
Grant Duncan, politically, how do you think he's going, Phil Twyford? It's such a big job he's got.
This is a high-pressure job for sure, and it's great to hear the Minister talking so positively and ambitiously. We need that right now because there really is a crisis, yes. But politically, the question is, come the next election, how many of those houses have been built? And I think some of the questions you asked about people maybe getting windfall gains out of this, and maybe that gets into the news somehow, it becomes a bit of a political issue at the next election.
Why are they so stubborn about means testing, do you think?
Actually, I kind of agree with him. Can we just relax on means testing? Let's just get people into houses, because I think what he's saying, look at the big picture, the supply will have an overall effect on the housing market, but there will no doubt be stories that come out, as they do, before the next election. So he's going to have to, there's a lot of detail that's not been worked out. Some of the questions that you asked, I think he's often saying, oh, we haven't worked that detail out yet. Does that matter, though?
I wonder if that matters. He is bringing the enthusiasm, isn't he? But that's only going to last for a while. Exactly,
yes, because come the next election, it's going to be, OK, Minister, where's the results? How many houses have you built? Who's in them? Have they been equitably distributed around the sorts of questions that Marama was asking, for instance? and what kind of quality, that's going to be a big issue too. If any of them are leaking, that's going to be interesting.
Corin, the numbers is actually a weak point, and that's an area where I think there needs to be a bit more massaging around the narrative. So at the moment we're talking about 100,000 homes over 10 years, and that's fantastic. I think most of us probably support that. The problem we've got is that the media is already talking about that as 10,000 per year. It was never going to be. It was going to take time to build up. I think he referred to some degree to that today. So what we've got a global figure of 100,000. What we need is an indication of what those numbers might look like, and certainly in those formative years. If it's 1,500 to 2,000 in year one, let's say that. If it's 5,000 in year two, 7,000 in year three, the assumption is that in year 10, it would, instead of 10,000, it might be 15 or 20,000. So that's a weakness in the narrative at the moment, because it's building an expectation, as we've referred to, that there's going to be 30,000 homes built by 2020, and I don't think any of us believe that that's
Jordan,
the case.
what do you think renters, those who want to get into a first, who are the target, are going to feel about this issue of a ballot and the idea that, you know, some who win that ballot really could win, particularly in Auckland?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable for people to have to go through a ballot process, and like Ashley was pointing out, it's not going to ramp up for a number of years, so that will be frustrating for people who desperately want to get into their homes and do it. I think the other point is, you know, it is ambitious, 100,000, but as people like Shamabi or Jakob have said, actually, you know, we could even be more ambitious, and maybe actually 100,000 isn't enough. Already in Auckland we have a deficit of 40,000 homes at the moment. Why aren't we actually talking 200,000? And I know in this context that sounds like a lot, but, you know, places like Sweden build 1 million homes over a period of 10 years, affordable, decent houses. You know, the government has to realise it's going to be expensive, but this is all sort of a once-in-a-generation chance to really ramp up supply, and I think $100,000 possibly isn't ambitious enough.
Yeah, I do believe that this is the opportunity that we have right now, but it has to be done with the private sector. It cannot be done otherwise. We costed out 250,000 houses onto green space land with the infrastructure that will be needed. It's going to cost in the area of about $112 billion to do. And we've got housing that's going to be needed in Hamilton, in Tauranga, in the East Coast, on the West Coast. It's not actually just about Auckland. We have to be building about 10,000 houses a year at least to be able to get everybody into homes, whether they're renting or owning or a state home. And we really are not going to be able to do it just with the government. The regulations need to be changed, the infrastructure needs to be put in there, and they literally don't have the money.
Actually, the banks, he sort of alluded to the idea that banks could get involved here and help. I mean, I guess there's a lot for them to gain because there's a lot of mortgages to write. What's he referring to?
Depends what he means by that. If he's talking about banks being involved as investors in their own right, I can't see how that's likely to happen. If he's talking about getting investors involved vicariously through the banks, in other words, investors getting involved in the market, the big problem that they've got at the moment is that their economic narrative is very much around things that scare investors away. So we're at a part of the market right now where we're talking about capital gains taxes for investors, where we're talking about ring fencing of tax losses, exactly the opposite of what you need to be saying to a market where you want investors to get into the market as private citizens and start investing in property, both for the sorts of things that we're talking about here and for rental purposes.
I'd say, actually, Corin, one of the issues that we need is we actually need our state to become really more central in housing. So the trend over the last 30 years has been for the state to kind of take its hand off the tiller, so to speak. So, you know, of course we need the private sector involved, but we actually need the state to deal with this issue of market failure. And, you know, a lot of investors have had it good for quite a long time.
That's tricky though, and Grant, the political challenges there are quite tricky because, you know, the private sector is a big part of our economy. There's only so much the government can force them to do.
Sure, exactly. There's going to be, look, there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of different parties who are going to have to make different choices, either as investors, renters, buyers, all of these sorts of things. I guess this is an opportunity, if it works for the government, this is an opportunity to bring those people together and work closely with investors and with iwi and so on and so forth. So everybody's got to lend a hand here. The danger is that, by the next election somehow it's not working. You know, that there's controversy, that different parties are feeling that they're not being heard or they're not getting a fair go.
But is there a bigger risk that if you've got, you know, Shane Jones having a crack at Air New Zealand, you've got talk of ending oil exploration, that there is a chilling effect on investors and that could ripple out?
Yes, well, there's already been a chilling effect on investors, I think, with some of the government's announcements. But I guess investors could see what's happening here as opportunities, really, and government and investors, I think, have to talk and work together here, rather than
Couldn't agree more. And just to put some numbers around that, just to put this in perspective, because I understand where Jordan's coming from, but there's around 600,000 rental units in New Zealand at the moment. Somewhere between 450 and 500,000 of those are provided by the private sector. So while I agree the state needs to ramp up its activity, the vast majority, the lion's share of that's already provided by the private sector. So scaring the horses in that sector risks derailing the good work that's being done on the other side by the state. It needs to be a collaboration of both.
Just finally before we go, Marama Fox, what do you think National needs to do here? I mean, we've seen Judith Collins, really get on Phil Twyford's case already. I mean, I think there's an element of goodwill towards this, isn't there? Because people want to see houses.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I think National need to be working with the government, and that sounds terrible because this is National. They just want to be
bipartisanship.
Forbid. There's a new concept. Hello. But we can't do this alone, and we can't do this if we're just going to be pointing and scrapping and blaming everybody for the failures. It has been a systematic failure of both governments for 30 years that has brought us to this point. Not any one government. National actually did quite a bit to get us to a position where building can happen, but Labor are going to have to take it across the line and actually get those houses built.
It's a good point, because I think National had already identified that Unitech site, hadn't they? So Labor's just kind of picked up the baton. Right, we have to go to the break.